Hi, I'm very excited to have you with us on this journey for implementing ISO 9001 within your organization, and without further ado, let's get started. So, what is ISO 9001? ISO 9001 is a quality management system designed to help your organization to always meet customer requirements. Okay? And the first thing that we have to do to meet customer requirements is actually to understand what those requirements are, and then we have to create some type of product or service that meets those exacting needs of your clients, and then to have the operational systems in place to make sure that we are able to consistently meet the requirements that your product has in terms of the product or service they are purchasing from you. And something extremely important about ISO standards is that they are designed for continual improvement. So the idea isn't that once you get certified, it means that your organization is doing excellent quality and no one is making any mistakes and everyone is working as should be, but rather that we have a system for continual improvement whereby we have methods in place to identify any issues within the organization, and we have processes and procedures in place that will help us to mitigate these risks from happening once again. The idea of learning from our mistakes is extremely important when it comes to an ISO certification. Now, ISO 9001 can be used by any organization in any industry, irrespective of the size. And this means that in no way, shape or form can the standard tell you how or what you will have to do to meet a specific requirement. The only thing that the standard can tell you to do is that it can explain what the requirement is, and then it is up to us during this implementation to make sure that we are meeting the requirements of the standard in a way that best suits the needs of your organization. And the idea behind this comes from the risk-based approach, okay, or risk management practices that are inbuilt within ISO 9001. So when it comes to risk management, we have to see risk as something, that not all companies work in the same way, and not all companies have the same risks within their processes. So if a particular company has a particular risk, then it is very important for them to make sure that they are doing whatever they need to do to mitigate that risk. If another company doesn't have the same type of risk, then they don't need to do anything to mitigate that risk. And therefore, two companies that can possibly be operating within the same industry, doing very similar work, might have different processes or different management systems that their company would benefit from most. Okay, so this is very important, and I'm saying this in the context that sometimes people tell me, but on ISO 9001 there's written that we have to do this. It would be very, very, very rare that the standard will actually tell you how you have to meet a requirement or what you actually need to do. Okay? Typically, the requirements are very vague and they do not explicitly explain what you need to do to meet a requirement. So when a person saying that an ISO certification will increase bureaucracy by default, it means that they are not really understanding the exact requirements of the standard, because I'm pretty sure that there is no requirement in the standard telling you that you have to have a bureaucratic system. Okay? So if, as a cause of having an ISO certification, an organization has a bureaucratic system, it reflects more about the implementation process for that ISO certification for that company rather than about the ISO standard itself. And I'm mentioning this in the context of making sure that when we are creating a management system, we should avoid at all costs to create a bureaucratic management system. Okay, the idea is that we use these ISO standards to help us to simplify our life, to simplify our processes, and we shouldn't use ISO standards to overcomplicate our lives, because our life is complicated enough as it is, and therefore we have to use ISO standards to help us to simplify things rather than complicate them further than to what they already are. Let's take a couple of steps back and discuss the history of these ISO standards and where they came from in the first place to understand the logic that they had when they created these standards. So, in World War I, there was an issue whereby bombs were not exploding when dropped on enemy territory, which was very bad, but not as bad as the problem they had in World War II, whereby bombs were exploding inside the factories. Okay? And with that in mind, the Allies asked their subcontractors to create a management system to document the processes and systems they were using to manufacture these bombs. And as I'm sure that would happen if I were to ask anyone within any organization to map out the processes, everyone used their own reasoning, used their own logic on how things have to be done whilst documenting a management system. Some chose to have a bullet point structure, some chose to write many text, some chose to consider these systems, and some chose to consider these other systems. And naturally, this left the Allies with an issue whereby they had to actually decipher what everyone was trying to include within their management system. So then the Allies took a step back and they said, okay, and they created a quality management system, the first version of a quality management system that basically defined and discussed what the requirements have to be for a company manufacturing ammunition in the context of a war. And that was the reason that they were able to understand what the root cause of the problem was to be able to fix it accordingly. And based on that, in 1942, ISO was launched in London, in the UK, and basically the role of ISO, and ISO stands for International Organization for Standardization, and the role of this entity is that they have to create standards relating to products, especially, for example, hollow concrete blocks, how they are tested, the materials, the composition that you have to check, HDMI cables, electrical sockets, any type of product, you name it, there is an ISO standard about it. But then there are around 20 management systems within the realm of ISO standards, whereby these management systems do not apply for the product itself, but for the company. Okay? And that is what we're talking about over here. And ISO 9001 was the first of such standards. And the current version of ISO 9001 is that of 2015. That is why when we see the standard of ISO 9001, we see it ISO 9001:2015. Okay? That means that is the current version of that particular standard. Now, the first version of ISO 9001 was launched in 1987. Okay? And this standard gets updated roughly every 11 years. And some people would ask me, when is the next standard going to be? Right now, I don't have any indication of when the standard is going to be. However, it seems like there's going to be an update. There's going to be an update at some point within the next couple of years. So 2026 or 2027. And every time there is an update in the standard, they make it in such a way that it is actually better. Okay? As you can understand, in 1987, the world was dominated by manufacturing, and therefore the standard reflected the needs of companies within the manufacturing industry. But as time was passing by, the service industry was growing in an exponential way, and now it has probably reached or possibly even exceeded the manufacturing industry, and therefore ISO standards were adapted accordingly. In particular, in this case, ISO 9001. So, as I'm saying, the standard moved away from being focused specifically on the needs of companies within the manufacturing, but it is now more relevant to companies within the service industry. They have eliminated the need for bureaucracy that might have been present in previous versions, but that is absolutely not a requirement in the version from the 2015 onwards. And this version is aimed at helping you to optimize your business. I like to call the current version of the standard as a business plan focused on the quality and operational aspects of your business rather than on the financial aspects of your business. And now I want to talk just a little bit about the certification process. Okay, so as regards the certification process, there are 3 different types of processes that I want to talk about. First of all, I want to explain the 10 steps that you have to go through when implementing an ISO management system until you reach the point of certification. I then want to talk about the process of a certification audit, whereby you're going to be working with a certification body to achieve your ISO certification. And finally, I want to explain what you need to do to meet the requirements of ISO 9001. So without further ado, let's start on these 10 steps for implementing a management system, and this is where most of the information for this training will be contained to help you to understand the process for the certification. So, first of all, you need to choose the implementation team. The implementation team relates to the people who will be involved in helping you to create the management system for your organization. Depending on the size of your organization, okay, it might be just yourself, or you might include some colleagues. However, it's very important to include, I would say, as many people as possible to make sure that you're listening to the different perspectives that the different people might have on this particular topic, to make sure that you are creating a management system that people can actually work with. Okay? Sometimes, unfortunately, I've seen this happening. As a consultant, I always make sure to avoid it, whereby it would be 2-3 people in a boardroom taking decisions, and then other people who will actually be following these tasks have to follow. But typically these 3 people in the boardroom wouldn't have the hands-on practice needed to actually understand what is required by these people who are doing the actual tasks. Therefore, it's important to involve these people when drafting the documentation to make sure that we are creating processes and systems that are relevant to the day-to-day needs of people doing the day-to-day work. And therefore, when creating the implementation team, it is important to take these things into consideration to make sure that we are considering the opinions of the relevant people, especially in the parts where we're mapping out the processes. And I'm going to explain that in step number 5, okay, of these 10 steps. The second element that we have on these 10 steps is the training. So by training, we mean this training that you're watching right now, to give you a full perspective of what ISO 9001 is all about. However, in the way that we're working on this particular arrangement is that I will be able to give you the information that you need as soon as you need it, and if you have any questions that might result from you whilst doing the implementation, you can ask me those questions directly, okay? However, it's very important that I will not give training on the actual requirements of the standard, because it might get a little bit too technical and too repetitive, I would say. So basically what we've done is that we've taken the requirements of the standard and translated that into a set of questions and systems that can be easily understood by everyone, okay, which are the gap analysis questions. And then all you need to do is to answer those questions, okay? So you don't need to worry about why am I asking you each individual questions, okay? You don't need to worry about the requirements of the standard. You just have to focus on answering the relevant questions that are available within this gap analysis, and to continue on the process as we're going to see within the software that we are using. So the second point relates to training, and training relates to this video, but then you will still need to keep on getting information about each individual screen. So for example, if we're talking about the objectives, then you will need to have some context and feedback about what type of objectives is expected from your organization in terms of objectives to meet the requirements of ISO 9001. Okay? But for now, what you have to focus on is that you're doing this training session so you're understanding the big picture of what we're going to do. The third thing that we have to consider when doing an implementation is the scope of certification, or to set the boundaries for certification. Something that is interesting when it comes to ISO certification is that if your company offers 5 services or 5 products, you can choose to get 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or all 5 of these products certified. Okay? And we call that the scope of certification. Okay? So if, for example, your company offers, random example, accountancy services and corporate services, you might choose to say, listen, for now I'm going to focus only on the accounting services. So your scope of certification would be provision of accountancy services. That would mean that during all audits relating to ISO certification, none of the processes, resources, people, equipment, etc. relating to corporate services will be considered because they are outside the boundaries for certification. They are outside the scope of certification. It's important that when you're looking at the scope of certification, you spend a couple of minutes to make sure that you are fully aligned with the scope of certification, because the scope of certification will actually be written in the certificate that you're going to have for ISO 9001 once you come to it. Okay? So that is something that is very important for you to consider. And now I want to talk about the quality manual, the processes, and the supporting system. Okay? And effectively, this is the documentation that has to be created when we are implementing an ISO 9001 standard within your organization. So let's start one by one. When it comes to the quality manual, okay, the quality manual is a document that is needed. First of all, it's not an actual requirement of the standard to have a manual, but I still like to create it for my clients to act as a place where we can store certain information. Some other consultants or trainers might say, let's have a document for interested parties, let's have a document for objectives, let's have this document and this other document, and that would leave you with a list of 20 documents. I'd rather have one document which would have all this information. And that is exactly what the quality manual is all about. Okay, so you will see on MSFrog a set of screens. All of these screens will be asking you for certain information. All of that information will be placed within the quality manual. And I like to call this as a static part of the management system. It's just like a business plan, okay, where you're going to define, for example, what are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And within the quality manual, we're also going to have a section where we're going to do a risk assessment for these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to define which risks and opportunities are most important for our organization, what the mitigation actions will be for such risks and opportunities, and to make sure that we are effectively mitigating these risks and seizing these opportunities. So when it comes to the manual, that is what effectively you would need to do. Or rather than what you would need to do, that is the point of having a manual in the first place. The second part talks about the processes, which is step 5 within the implementation. When working on ISO 9001, we have to consider effectively 4 main processes, okay? And one of these 4 processes usually does not apply to organizations. And let me explain what these processes are. First of all, we have the sales process. And the sales process is the part whereby we are communicating to our customers what products or services we offer, which is also called marketing. Okay? We don't need to go into a lot of detail about what marketing activities you do. We are mostly concerned with that particular instance whereby the customers see your marketing activities and make first contact with you to get more information about your products or services. So we're interested in that first part up until you understand the requirements of the client, you provide them with a quote, you agree on the quote, and there is some type of contract signed if it's relevant for your business. Okay? So we call that part we call all of that process the sales process, okay? Which effectively starts from us receiving the request. A very important part of the sales process is the issuing of a quote, and the sales process is typically concluded by the signing of some type of an agreement with the client, whereby there is written what us as a company will be offering to our clients in terms of a service or a product in exchange for what price and what timeline. Okay, so quality, time, and money are the things that are typically have to be agreed with a client before they can feel comfortable moving forward. So that is the sales process. Another process that we have to consider is the purchasing process. The purchasing process starts from the stage whereby, first of all, we identify what needs to be purchased. Okay, so we're going to identify what needs to be purchased, and we're either going to purchase for a particular client or to stock if it's relevant to you. If it's not relevant to you, no problem. You can still do the same things, just not consider this part. And in your case, you're going to purchase for a specific client. So we're going to determine the need that we have to purchase. Then we're going to communicate these requirements with your supplier. You're going to receive the product or service from your supplier, and you're going to make sure that the product or service received from your supplier meets the expectations of your organization and those of your clients. And it's important that when thinking about the purchasing process, we're thinking about purchasing from suppliers that give us core products or services that we need to meet the needs and expectations of our customers. So for example, if I am a consultant and I'm thinking about the purchasing process, I don't need to think about how I purchase my stationery, okay? Because ultimately, if the client, if I'm writing something for the client and my pen stops working, I can easily replace it, and the client is literally not concerned with what type of pen do I use. However, if I'm asking subcontractors to go work on my behalf with my clients, my client will be very interested in the subcontractor that I'm sending. And therefore, when thinking about the purchasing process for a consultant, for example, we have to consider only the process whereby we are hiring third-party contractors to go do the work for my clients, not the stationery. The stationery is very, it's a side product or service that we might need to be able to render our service to the client, but the person, the consultant who's actually going to meet the client is extremely important and crucial for my customers. Okay, so that is what the purchasing process is all about. The operational processes is the third element, and the operational processes change from one client to the next drastically. Okay, so if you are an insurance company, then it might be the claims process, it might be how you are getting requests from your clients, it might be that you're doing some type of surveys to inspect the damage that is available on your clients once they submit a claim. If you're an accountancy firm, it might be the process of doing bookkeeping, the process of submitting a VAT return. If you are a company manufacturing windows, aluminium windows, it might be the installation process, the manufacturing process, the customer service process. Okay, so as you can see, these are very different, wildly different from one company to the next. And the fourth and last type of process that we have to consider is the design and development process. If your company's role is to take, very vague customer requirements and turn them into very specific product specifications to meet customer needs, then it means that you're doing design. For example, if your client tells you, I want to move my body from this place to another place in an extremely fast speed, then that might be that they need a car or a plane, So as you can see, and if our role is to build whatever the customer is asking for us, then in that case we have design. This type of question will actually be one of the questions in the gap analysis process. I won't go into much detail because to explain it for all types of industries it would be relatively impossible. Therefore, I will guide you as we go along in the implementation process, and you don't need to worry about that. What I wanted to explain right now is that there are 4 types of processes: the sales process, purchasing, operations, and design. And during the implementation, we will naturally need to map out these processes. And as I mentioned earlier, it's important that you consider your colleagues within the implementation team to make sure that you get the right input from them when mapping out these processes. And the last thing that I wanted to speak about as regards documentation is the supporting system. The supporting system relates to a set of processes that your company might not be doing right now, but that are required in terms of having an ISO certification. For example, to have a process to gather customer feedback, to handle complaints, to evaluate the performance of your suppliers, to make sure that you are doing some type of evaluation to your suppliers, to have a training plan for your employees, and to have a maintenance plan for your equipment. Okay? So these are simple systems that you need to have in place. You don't need to have procedures, you don't need to overcomplicate this. You just need to have systems that you either have right now already, and in which case they don't need to change, possibly. But if you don't have anything in place, we just have to have some type of simple system in place. Typically it would be an Excel sheet that you can use to meet this particular requirement of the standard. So, taking a step back, the documentation that is required to meet the requirements of ISO 9001 relates to having a quality manual, mapping out the key processes, and building the supporting system. And naturally, I will guide you through all of that during this implementation process. And the next thing that we have to speak about relates to the system deployment. So after you've made these small changes within your organization, for example, if you didn't have a system to gather customer feedback in the past, now we need to have, now we've designed the system to gather customer feedback. At the system deployment stage, you will need to just make sure that you're actually using the system that we would have talked about. Okay? And once that is done, then we can go ahead with the internal audit. The internal audit is a process whereby we're going to check for evidence that you're actually doing what you said that you're doing. So in ISO circles, there is this quote which says that say what you do what you say. So when we're building the documentation, we are saying what you do, then you have to do what you say, okay, you and your colleagues, and then at the internal audit stage, we're going to make sure that you're actually doing what you told us that you're doing, okay? And the internal audit ultimately is another opportunity for you and your organization to make sure that there is a certain level of accountability on who is doing what, okay? And it's another opportunity for continual improvement, which is the mindset that you need to have throughout the implementation process once you get certified and beyond. The idea is always that of continual improvement. Once the internal audit is ready, then we can go ahead with the management review, which is another opportunity for improvement through having an agenda defined by the standard. Okay, we're going to follow the agenda defined by the standard to have this management review to make sure that we're discussing all the topics that have to be discussed to make sure that we're achieving continual improvement. And last but not least is that we're going to work with a certification body. So just like a company or a person rather who's learning how to drive, they have to go to someone who will teach them how to drive, and then a governmental agency would give them their driving license. Or if someone is sitting for an exam, they would have a tutor and the person correcting the exam, and they have to be different people. And just like accountants, there's accountants and auditors. In ISO certification, there are trainers or people who are helping you to implement the management system, or consultants, and there are auditors. And that is what the role of a certification body is. And when working with a certification body, it's very important that you choose to work with an accredited certification body. If you're working with a non-accredited certification body, the certificate that you're going to have after working with them would have zero value. Okay? So it's important that you work with an accredited certification body that understands your needs and you're going to make contact with such a certification body, answer a few questions they might have, including the scope of certification, which we spoke about earlier, number of employees, and possibly a few other questions. And that should be all the information they would need to be able to give you a quote. Once you approve their quote, you would have effectively appointed the certification body to start working on your audit. And the process of certification, the technical process from a certification body, relates to these, let's call them, 3 main steps. First of all, there is a stage 1 audit. In a stage 1 audit, what the auditor does is that they compare your documentation, okay, to the requirements of the standard, to make sure that your documentation is talking about all the requirements of the standard. And since we will be creating that documentation together, I'm sure that there won't be any problems and you will move swiftly onto stage 2. Okay? So in a stage 2 audit, what the auditor is going to do is that they're going to check your documentation, once again, to what you're doing in reality now. Which, as you might recall, it is the same exact thing that we're going to be doing in the internal audit. So, how the implementation process is designed, it is designed in a way to make sure that you are able to succeed and that at each and every step you are adequately prepared to be able to answer any questions that you're going to be facing. Okay? So, after stage 2 audit has been completed, the auditor cannot tell you that you've been certified there and then. Okay? The auditor will take that report, take it to the certification body, discuss with the certification body about their findings, recommend your company for certification, and then you will receive the certificate. Okay? So after that is done, then effectively you would have received your ISO certification. But what do you need to do to maintain your ISO certification? The opposite of what we have in academic circles, okay, so for example, when I'm an engineer, and as soon as I graduated as an engineer, I got a certificate which presumably says that I will understand the current and all future types of engineering, which naturally is not the case at all. You still need to keep on learning and training and having experiences to be able to say that you can be confident that you are up to date with the current practices that are being implemented. So, academy works in a way that after you complete a course, you get a certificate, end of journey. ISO certification works in a completely different way, and in my opinion, after you get certified, it only means that you have just started on your journey of ISO certification, because, as I mentioned a couple of times, the idea of an ISO certification is that of continual improvement. Therefore, once you get certified, now you have all the system in place available, and you just have to keep on using the system to achieve these types of improvements that we are so looking for. And therefore, to maintain your ISO certification, a company must do an internal audit, a management review meeting, and host the certification body for an audit once a year. Okay? Naturally, you also need to keep your documentation updated. You need to be following the processes that you have implemented, but those are the things that we're going to be checking in the internal audit and the external audit anyway. Okay? And now, let's talk about the benefits of having an ISO 9001 certification. First of all, there is that very strong and obvious benefit in terms of brand positioning. Okay, so ISO 9001 certified company are invariably going to have a better reputation in the market. Okay, you are more likely to acquire prestigious customers and suppliers, and you're going to improve the repeatability of the product and service that you offer, and therefore improving customer satisfaction. When you go to buy a burger from a big franchise, you don't expect that burger to be, a gourmet burger with the best type of meat in the world, but you know what type of service, price, and quality you're going to be expecting, irrespective of which outlet of that franchise you visit from all over the world. And that is consistency, and that is the power of a brand. Let's try to implement these ideologies within your organization, whereby irrespective of the person who who is helping your customer, all your customers will get the same type of treatment, okay? And then we can increase the level of that treatment as we go along. But having this repeatability and consistency is extremely important in terms of quality. And the other angle of the types of benefits that you're going to get from having an ISO certification relates to the business performance. So in terms of business performance, we're seeing that, and these are the types of benefits that I like to focus on. First of all, you're going to have improved process efficiency. You might or you might not have flowcharts that describe exactly what you do as a company, but by sitting down and actually re-looking or looking for the first time at the processes that I described, so sales, purchasing, operations, and possibly design, with the right people in that same room, then you're going to have a very fruitful conversation of how these processes can be improved. Okay, so that is the first point. The second point, management by data. Rather than taking decisions based on the opinion of some person, let's start taking decisions based on data. And that is what an ISO 9001 management system based on the ideology that I'm going to share with you throughout this implementation journey will give. Last but not least, relates to improved employee morale, whereby if people see that you are investing in the processes and in the quality of your organization, they will feel like they are working in a more secure company, and especially if you are taking their opinions whilst you're mapping out the processes, then they will feel part of the organization and they will feel that their opinions are actually valued. That's all I had for you for today. If you have any questions, as always, please let me know. I'm always very happy to help. Thank you so much.